Hello and welcome to Book Lovers Companion, the podcast about books, authors, their craft, and more. Dear listeners, dear friends, welcome to another live event, another live stream of Book Lovers Companion. And it's an absolute pleasure to do so, especially on St. Patrick's Day weekend. Sláinte to everyone in Ireland and those who celebrate with the Irish. Get your Guinness, get ready, relax, and join me and my guest for a wonderful conversation. And here he is, my guest, Robert Craven. Robert, it's an absolute pleasure to have you back on the show.
Thank you, Edith, for having me back on. And can I just say, Bannock Tain, a Féile Pádraig, Orav Galer. It's a happy St. Patrick's Day to you and all of our good friends.
Yep,
Sláinte.
same from here. Sláinte.
Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely.
I suppose I'll just give you a quick background as to who I am and what
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing. My name is Robert Craven. I have 10 books out that have been self-published on Amazon. And I'm in the process of my 11th book at the moment, in work in progress.
Oh,
So I suppose what I could start off with is that, as we all know, publishing is a very tough game. In fact, over the past few years, getting to the stage where it's just not enough space even for good writers to get their books in. So I'd like to start with two quotes. The first one is over 100 years ago. The respected American writer and critic Van Wyck Brooks wrote an essay deploring the use of highbrow and lowbrow to categorize fiction. He maintained what mattered was the quality of the result on readers and their culture. Genres have an immense ability to communicate and influence. The second quote comes from a recent one by Mira Marathi of OpenAI, who said, "Some creative jobs maybe will go away, but maybe they shouldn't have been there in the first place." And Miss Marathi forgets one simple fact: no machine understands or can relate to the human condition or the experience of existence. And our jobs as authors are to actually develop the actual process of creativity. For my own journey, I see writing as an exploration. As you create more work, resilience and self-belief become more essential. And I see writing as a lifelong journey. If you feel compelled to breathe life into the characters you've created, it'll be worthwhile persisting with it, if only for yourself. Therein lies perhaps a realistic view of success: a project completed, a piece of your own creativity realized, a tangible result, a book. My earliest book memories are of reading Willa Price's Guerrilla Adventure or Clyde Rubberbull's Viking Adventure. I fell hopelessly in love with the sheer escapism of the adventure novel. If I could pinpoint the one book that inspired me to think about having a go at writing, it was Stephen King's Salem's Lot. I discovered King after Tobe Hooper's TV adaptation of the novel. I had to read the book. After that, I devoured The Shining, Carrie, The Stand, and Christine. King was the gateway to other writers who have had a profound influence on me. Those writers would be Lionel Davidson, Elmore Leonard, James Herbert, John le Carre, Jack Higgins, and the very underrated Alan Dean Foster. These authors would inspire me to write my first story in 1991, titled The Chase. I submitted it to a writing competition, a speculative fiction magazine called FTL, run and edited by John Kenny, and it was offering a cash prize for an original short story. The winner and 7 runners-up would get their stories published and illustrated in the edition. I didn't win the cash prize, but the short piece I wrote was published, and 33 years later it still looks good. Excuse me. This led me to starting my first big novel, Get Lennon, which spawned a 5-book action thriller series featuring Allied spy Ava Molinar. She's very much a James Bond kind of character with nail varnish, and I liked the idea of a female protagonist and revelled in her daring wartime escapades. But I stick to one caveat with the books. I envisaged a tight time frame spanning 1933 to 1946, and after closing the series off with Eagles Hunt Wolves, I moved to other genres. I decided to stretch out from the World War II genre and explore other avenues. The Bond-style novel, Road of a Thousand Tigers. I tried a steampunk book called The Mandarin Cipher. I actually really enjoyed that one. And now I've moved into the crime thriller police procedural, which started with A Kind of Drowning in 2021 and last year's release, Malign Intent. The transition from one genre to another without losing your voice and style can be daunting, and the keywords here are adaptability and versatility. One of the best examples of this is David Morrell, the creator of the Rambo books. He created a trilogy of Victorian novels and took the adventure genre format and adapted it to the Victorian prose, creating both a realistic and gothic world with the great anti-hero Thomas de Quincey and his daughter Emily. The three books were A Murder is a Fine Art, Inspector of the Dead, and Ruler of the Night. Morrell takes the classic Victorian mystery and flips it into a thriller but without compromising authenticity. I love these so much that I sent him a thank you message to his website. To my surprise, he wrote back thanking me, and for the next few years an unexpected correspondence began. I cannot emphasize enough his generosity and advice, and I gave him thanks in the acknowledgement notes of Malign Intent. Now we go to rejection and criticisms. Rejection is an unpleasant fact of a writer's life. It's one of the necessary evils writers must endure in pursuit of their goals. Get Lennon, my first book, was a good example. I pitched it to roughly 285 agents, publishers, of which only 71 responded, and they were all rejections. You learn to build up a layer of very tough skin through this process. You learn to roll with the punches, and here's where resilience is formed. That tough outer shell that must be coupled with unshakable self-belief in your work. As these rejections piled up, it only made me more bloody-minded and determined. Eventually, I did land a small press publishing deal. To bookend this, during the height of COVID pandemic, I pitched A Kind of Drowning to 127 publishers and agents, and this was universally rejected. But I did make one very useful contact, Mark Lucas from the Soho agency in London. We spoke on the phone for 40 minutes, and it was one of the most important conversations I had. 40 minutes of 4 decades of expertise in the business. And I reworked the book. He was generous with his time as well. And we spent months reviewing and suggesting where we could improve, and I found myself re-evaluating my style and reinventing my own writing style. Very like a singer learning how to reinterpret a song. Now, I'll be the very first to admit, I am sensitive to criticism. You think your words are dipped in gold, and you think you have a literary masterpiece on your hands, but then you hand your precious words over to an editor, a cold set of eyes that doesn't have any emotional investment. Then you rework, revise, and suddenly your words of magical beauty are now just clunky sounding fool's gold. I've been fortunate over the 10 novels to have only been garnered a handful of 1 or 2 star reviews. Some people just didn't enjoy the book. It's subjective by its very nature. Though you get the odd vicious one, I do tend to ignore these. But I do pay close attention to the 2-star reviews. They do carry some useful commentary, some kernels of truth, because they tried to make like the book more than they could. Writer's block, another thing that I struggle with. I have a very good friend, Tony Kenna, a fine singer-songwriter, has an online music site called the Independent Music Review, where he invites music lovers to review a CD or a streaming album. This opportunity not only kept the creative juices flowing, writing reviews, but I have made great friends with musicians who have kindly reciprocated with sharing my books on their own platforms. This is the one thing I can recommend. If you find a niche outside of the writer community, but who are nevertheless creative, chefs, musicians, gardeners, people from industries that use the written word, but not dependent on it, you can build a network that runs parallel, but not running into your own work. It'll reap unexpected rewards. Even when I go on holidays, I pack a small notebook and keep a travel journal. Sometimes a new scene, a weather event, or a person writing at the airport or sitting in a restaurant are crossing you become an element to one of your stories. I could also recommend you create a website and good practice to keep the content fresh and relevant and to your work as it grows and evolves. There's always going to be tough times. There are days when you can't face the project, and if I'm struggling with a draft, which is common, I try to set a 10-minute task, one sentence, one paragraph, or even one line of dialogue that might need a rewrite. I set a small goal. Go for a coffee with a friend or give your dog that extra walk. Give your head some space. Agatha Christie once observed her best ideas came from washing the dishes, and I do a lot of cleaning around the house. I also journal every day and I set myself small tasks, and you'll be amazed where the ideas come from as they percolate in your subconscious. Now, when I get up, I have a discipline. I rise at 5 o'clock every morning and I write till about 7 o'clock before I leave for work. If you do this every day for 3 months, you've got the bones of a first draft. And I try to do that for the space of about a year. I put the book away for about 2 or 3 months and then I go back to it. And the questions you always have to ask are these: is the framework good enough to hold the synopsis? Are the inciting incidents in the right sequence on the timeline? Is the dialogue authentic or is it just tin ear dialogue? This is where beta readers come in handy. I've got one or two who I trust and will look at it too. Once I get the edits, critiques, and suggestions back, I collate them and start to rework. Usually, a book takes about 4 to 6 months to rework, and I may go through anywhere between 8 and 13 revisions. For example, Malign Intent took 2.5 years to start, but A Kind of Drowning had 13 full rewrites before it was released. And I cannot stress enough the importance of reading. Good books, bad books, all genres. You realize in some instances you're a better writer than the ones you're reading, and in other instances you realize how far you have to go. I read for pleasure if I'm not researching. It's a lifelong love affair. There really is nothing like discovering a new genre, a new author, or revisiting a classic. Your library card should be an essential tool in your kit. Now, to wrap up this short little talk, I can offer some final words of encouragement. The one is from the legendary Spanish cellist Pablo Casals, who was once asked why in his 90s he still kept practicing 6 hours a day. He replied, "Because I think I'm making progress." And the American Kenneth Coach once said to his summer academy, "Go home and dream, then write a poem about your dream, and also write a prose account about your dream. Then discover the prose accounts were better than the poems. Go home and dream, ladies and gentlemen. Go home and dream and write." Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. It was indeed very inspiring, and there were quite a few points I would like to come back to.
Sure, go ahead.
First one, you mentioned AI and the creativity process and writing as a
Mm.
lifelong journey. Have you have you followed the recent discussion about AI and how companies use authors' books to better
Train their machines. I
their
have read
machines?
about it, and in that sense, particularly with Amazon books, we are quite vulnerable that way. Um, the thing is, the way I look at it personally is AI is a tool. Like any tool, it can be abused or it can be
Yeah.
used for your betterment. Generally, when I'm using AI, I might use it for suggesting SEOs for my website,
Hmm.
which I do find useful. And the other things I might use AI for is part of a research.
Hmm.
But the big, big problem with AI is it can't handle historical data. So, for example, if you're writing a history paper, it's likely or been known to throw up the Battle of Hastings happened in 1945, for example. So that's one way that AI does struggle, particularly with timelines. Um, I think it's an evil, a necessary evil, and it's how you handle it that's important.
Hmm. I've been asked a few weeks back if I've ever used ChatGPT, and honest to God, I can say never.
Yeah, yeah. It's I've used it out of curiosity.
Ah.
I've also used Google Gemini,
Mm-hmm.
and there's also another one, the Chinese platform DeepSeek, sorry. But it's down to the mindset. I'm not going to get these devices to write my book for me,
Hmm.
but they might be able to be useful for the research side of it,
Yeah. Yeah.
because AI cannot reproduce a writer's voice. If you read one of my books, I'd like to think, well, that's a Robert Craven, not
Yeah.
a machine that wrote it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's lacking the soul of the writer.
Exactly, the spirit, the process of the
Yeah.
creative act.
Yeah.
All it can do is
Absolutely.
generate content.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely agree. And another thing was interesting. You mentioned Stephen King's Salem
Yeah.
Slot as
Oh,
your
yeah.
inspiration.
That
That's
was the
interesting.
starting gun for me. I think every writer can say, "What was the book that made you want to write?"
Yeah,
And I was 14 when I read that book, and I had to try and write like him. I had to write a story like his. So he's definitely a profound influence on me as a writer, but he's a wonderful educator in his own right, and he
yeah,
has a huge amount of influences that he encourages and promotes. So,
yeah.
yeah, Salem's Lot was the one that started it all.
Why, may I ask, why this book in particular?
Well, I gravitate toward horror. I think I do
Ah,
like horror stories. When I was 10 years old in 1976, I badgered and begged my parents to take me to see Jaws at the cinema, and they relented. And to say I was traumatized was a vast understatement. But I always kind of liked the horror that was created there. The
yeah.
What Stephen King does very well, and what even Steven Spielberg does very well, is to create the tension long before
Mm,
the act. And I
mm,
think that is a very good skill, and I was drawn to that. That's where I would love to write a good horror book. If there's
mm.
one genre I haven't really tackled yet.
Ah, yeah, they keep you on the edge of your seat, don't they?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
James Herbert is a very good example of on the English side. He's very good, and I read all of his books as well. And once again, yes, he delivers horror, but it's not gratuitous, and it's also the tension building up to it. And I love old horror movies. I love a good slasher movie, and I'll watch anything.
yeah. Me too. I mean, I agree with you there. I have to say. I mean, I'm all for blood and gore if it works for me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
If it's not done just for the sake of blood and gore. I had this conversation only yesterday with Lisa,
Right.
and she doesn't do the blood and gore, which is okay because you
Yeah,
shouldn't do it if you think it's just, oh yeah, to put it in there for the sake of it. No,
yeah.
it has to
And
make
even when I was
sense.
writing my war books and there were battles in it, I tried to minimize the gore because everybody knows what happens in a
Yeah,
battle. But I'm more interested in the after effects, or what the characters go through after they've killed somebody or
yeah.
shot somebody. So that's a more interesting area, and I generally minimize the gore.
Mm, mm. Yeah, a lot of crime fiction writers, also from other countries, people from Iceland, for example, a few of them said, "Yeah, I don't do the blood and gore because, like we
Yeah.
said before, what's the point if it doesn't help with the plot? Why
No.
should I put
Okay.
it there? I mean,
And it does turn some readers off. I
yeah,
know some people who just don't like reading
yeah,
Joe Nesbo, for example, or Kathy Reichs. I mean, they're even Stephen King. Some of his later works, Doctor Sleep, I thought has a very gratuitous scene in it involving a 14-year-old boy, and I do wonder whether it was relevant to the story because it
mm,
does go on for quite a few passages, and
mm,
it borderlines on torture rather than
mm-hmm,
telling a story.
mm,
So, again, a good editor will jump in and say, no, that's not going to work.
yeah, yeah. And you also said genre transition, which is interesting because there are quite a few authors who do that, like you do.
Yeah, yeah,
And but there are also authors who shy away from, although they would like to, but
yeah.
for different reasons they shy away. What is your, or how do you decide on a certain genre for a book?
That's a good question. I was very drawn to steampunk, more the culture behind it, and I do love all the old Sherlock Holmes stories. So I was invited by a very good American writer, Catherine Stovall, to contribute a steampunk short story to her anthology, Cogs in Time. And I thought, what a good idea to write a kind of Victorian kind of. I mean, I did my research and studied it very carefully about the era, but then I created basically a woman made of mercury. It was called The Properties of Mercury. and I had a lot of fun writing that. And that was so far out of my comfort zone because I had to try and make the dialogue sound like a Victorian novel, kind of gothic, kind of short, but also authentic. And that was probably the one that was most out of my comfort zone, but I had an awful lot of fun doing it. And that kind of gave me the confidence to move into the spy era and write an actual sort of James Bond book, The Road of a Thousand Tigers. And I sort of pitched that idea to the Ian Fleming Society, saying I'd like to write a story about 009 because he seems to be the most common character outside of 007. And they sent me a very nice but very firm letter back saying, you can't do this. You can't use N, you can't use Moneypenny, you can't use Q. So I thought, fair enough, I get that. So I rewrote it and created that era, but created a whole new bunch of characters. And that was a really good experience.
Okay, and you just said before that horror is something that interests you immensely, yet you
Yeah,
haven't dared. Do you
I
think it might be in the future?
I think it would be. I was really planning on a sort of a Jack the Ripper book. I was
Oh.
sort of interested in that kind of goes back to the Victorian era. Now, of course, he's been identified by DNA. There was quite a large amount of press, but I did toy around, and I will admit it got to about 80 pages of an A4 sheet. Where what if he disappeared? He cooled off. I think it was Jeffrey Dahmer had 11 years between kills. So I had the idea that his last kill is 1888, but his next
Mm,
killing is 1907, and set it
mm,
around the coronation of Edward VII.
mhm,
So you had this Edwardian era beginning with a Victorian killer, but I just couldn't get to the plot because uh, it was possibly the most well, the first kind of sensationalized tabloid murders in the papers.
yeah.
And the five girls got a terrible end, and I didn't feel comfortable recreating that kind of realism, that kind of
Mm,
real character. If I was going to
mm,
write a horror, it'd probably be something closer to vampires or werewolves. But
mm.
they've been done to death as well, so maybe a ghost story or two will be.
It's interesting that you mentioned Jack the Ripper because the fascination for him never goes really away, does it?
No, it doesn't, and it's the fact that it was in many ways a kind of class thing. It was kind of the most vulnerable women in
Yeah,
society killed by possibly a guy who was middle or upper class, and
yeah,
Whitechapel was a very tough area at the time. So
yeah.
it's one of those things that is. I actually adapted some characters from that back book and introduced them into other books. So they always say there's no word is ever wasted. You will reuse it.
Yeah. Yeah. Have you read the the book by Haley Rubenhall about the victims, the five?
Yeah,
Yeah, it's fascinating because she takes a closer look at the victims of Jack the Ripper. It's not about
yeah,
him; it's about the victims, and um, she tries to give us a different view of these women.
right.
Mainly finding out or informing the reader that what we thought so far of the
Yeah,
women
yeah,
wasn't all what we really thought. I mean, their backgrounds, their lives, and how they happened to become his victims,
yeah. Wrong
and that
place, wrong time. Yeah,
yeah, and also their social backgrounds. Where did they come from? Were they really prostitutes, or did they fall on hard times?
yeah.
And and so on. It was a fascinating read, and
I must
like
check
I
that
said,
out. Yeah, that'd be something worth looking at from the victim's perspective. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. Who were they? And that's what interested her. Not so much Jack the Ripper, not at all, but who were these poor women who got murdered?
exactly.
Yeah. And do you think, or would you say, staying with the genre question, you said you read across every genre and you're
I
interested
do.
in
Yeah,
everything. And do you feel, or is there any genre you would say I wouldn't write at all, or I'm not so fond of?
Well, I really don't get Game of Thrones. I will be honest with you. I've tried watching it, and I've read some of the George R. R. Martin books,
Hmm.
but yeah, I would say fantasy now is something that just wouldn't interest me at all.
Hmm.
Or either to read it or to write it, and even if I did, it would feel a little artificial. I
Hmm.
creating things, but I lean toward. I try to be as authentic as I can in my books. I
Hmm.
try to research things very carefully. You don't always get it right, but I want the reader to walk
Yeah.
away thinking they are in the middle of a real situation.
Yeah.
And dragons, goblins, elves, leprechauns, no, not for me. Not for me.
Yeah, well, leprechauns are what did I read today? Are Santa's elves, and they found out drinking on the job or something like that.
Well, it's the pot of gold mystery. We all want to grab ourselves. Apparently, if you grab a leprechaun, you got to kiss him. Then he has to give you his pot of gold location. So
Ah, okay.
that's Irish myth for you now.
Good to know. You said a Victorian era or 19th century. It is still, or it is a fascination, not only for authors, but also for readers. I have to admit, I'm the
Yeah,
same. I love to
yeah,
read. I love to read books that are set in the Victorian era, and like you said, try to make it authentic.
exactly.
It
Yeah,
is hard to make it authentic, isn't it?
it
Like,
is, and
especially
you
the
can't
dialogue.
really recreate that because it's
Yeah.
another era, another two, three, nearly
Mm.
200 years ago now at this stage. So how do
Yeah.
you bring your both you and the reader into that world?
Yeah.
It is a challenge.
Yeah. And that's where the research comes in, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
And how to avoid falling into the rabbit hole of research.
Yeah, well, I found out with the Second World War. I found I was reading, certainly I was researching Get Lenin, and particularly I went very close, deep into the stories from the Eastern Front. I read the Stalin biographies, the Hitler biographies, the Lenin biographies, and the problem is that you have so much information at your fingertips, and it's how do I sift this into the story? And that did create a lot of problems from the because it was my first book, so I really hadn't got a clue what I was doing. I was just banging it down and trying to research. And eventually, for the second, third, and fourth books, what I generally did was wrote the story, and then I'd go back to the books and check that way. So I'd write everything down, then reread and go back and clip onto the historical elements that were relevant to the story. So instead of writing about, oh, the Germans invaded on X amount a day, I would have the tanks rolled into the town, let people guess after that what's happening.
Yeah. And it's always fascinating when you hear people who wrote historic fiction talk about their books and so on. And you might know her or maybe not. Do you know Linda Stratman?
I don't know. I'd be a liar if I said otherwise.
She writes also historic fiction, and she has this sort of female Sherlock Holmes,
Oh,
sort
right, very
of.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And it was fascinating what she said. She's one of those research nerds, one could say,
yeah,
because she's very meticulous in her books and
yeah,
in her research. And she had this book where there was this cycling club.
very
I think
good.
it was Bayswater, and she said it didn't exist. This certain cycling club didn't exist, but it could have
Yeah,
existed. It
yeah,
could have
yeah.
been
Well,
there.
yeah, cycling was all the rage toward the end of the 19th century. And full enough, one of my characters in the Mandarin cipher, the steampunk, did manufacture cycles and sold it for a small fortune, and that's how he builds his empire up, his works, if you will. But no,
Yeah,
the bicycle was a huge revolution in the UK, particularly in London,
yeah,
when they had to build parks to allow the cyclists to go in and out, and cycling clubs were enormous.
yeah. Especially for the women, I suppose, a new
Mm.
kind of freedom when they were
Well,
finally.
they changed their costumes. They moved
Yeah,
away from the sort of corsets and
yeah,
the large skirts
yeah,
to trousers.
yeah, yeah. Reform clothes that came in a bit later and so on.
Yeah,
Yeah. I always find it fascinating people who do all this research and they nail it. I mean, it's incredible.
Oh yeah, yeah. But I think in a situation like that where you are describing scenes, less is more. I
Yep.
don't think you need to go into the finer details. You could have
Yeah.
like a detail on a cuff or a watch or a type
Yeah.
of hat or a hat pin, and I'd leave it at that.
Exactly. I mean, that's also the question of what do people know. And I had this with my book, which is also historic fiction, and
Very good.
I
Looking
wrote
forward to reading it.
thank you. And there is this scene in Vienna. We have this huge park. You probably heard about it, Prater, and you have this alley. Still exists, of course, even today. And we have this building at the end
Uh-huh.
of this alley. And it was the name of it is Lusthaus.
All right.
Oh, sounds lustful. It wasn't. It
Yes, it sounds
isn't. It
like Lust
isn't.
House.
It
Yeah,
sounds like a
yeah.
brothel. It never was. It was a small hunting lodge for the emperor.
Right. Yeah.
It was never. I mean, one could think it was that a
Yeah,
brothel.
you could make that connection.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. But it wasn't a hunting lodge. And today there's a cafe.
Right.
And also the question of what is the Prater and so on. And my editor or my publisher said, yeah, might put in a teeny tiny kind of explanation because you know what you're talking about. That's also another
Yes.
thing which can be difficult because we know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
But what about other people, readers from other countries and so on? I mean, where do you draw the line? And I think it was
Yeah.
Claire Ashton who said or who wrote in the author's notes. I mean, I'm not putting in what the NHS is because I'm not
Yeah. Yeah.
explaining it. If you want to know, if you can't figure it out during reading, look it up.
Yeah. 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 Well, I found now myself is that the first book that I ever wrote, you're inclined to spoon feed the information to the reader, but I don't do that anymore now. I
Mm,
think an awful lot of readers they'll either like your book or they won't like it. But
yeah,
if you bog them down in detail, I think you're going to lose interest so fast. It's just I don't
yeah,
do it.
yeah. And if I want to know, like she wrote, look it up.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean,
Well, see, with police procedural, particularly the last two books I've written, pretty much every police force in the world investigates more or less the same way.
yeah,
So I literally do not bog the reader down in minutiae. I just, he's at the scene, crime scene, tape, this is the
mm,
body, what do we do? How do we solve it? And I
mm,
just leave it at that.
yeah,
Because
yeah,
I think an
absolutely.
awful lot of readers, if they're a fan of that genre, will be able to paint the picture in their heads anyway when they're reading it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And you also spoke about rejection in your
Yeah,
talk, and
it's a fact of life.
there's quite a lot rejection you had. And do you have any advice for people out there how to cope with it, what to do, what shall they do, what can they do?
There's not a lot you can do with it. What I do recommend is, and I'm as guilty as anybody else at the start, I build an Excel sheet. I keep a
Mm,
track of every agent I send it to. And what I could suggest is that if you keep some kind of document, Word document or Excel is very good for it because you can put the agent, the address, and the time that you've sent the manuscript or the pitch to. What I do find is that generally people get so bogged into the pitching process, they sometimes say the same thing to the same agent, and that annoys agents even further. What I have learned is that if you have a 25-word tagline, imagine you're selling your book to a film studio, and generally the attention span of a movie executive is about 25 words. So what you could say is, if you're pitching something like a romance story, do it in 25 words, but think of it as a poster on a video or a Netflix show or the cinema. That generally worked for me in the sense that at least I started getting responses back. Because what the email does, and an awful lot of agents just don't have the time to scroll down through a detailed synopsis. So worked for me, and I'm not saying it worked, I didn't get published, but I did get responses back. is to have that 25-word movie pitch in the title, first line. Always get the name of the agent you're pitching to. Make sure you spell their name correctly. And what I also worked for me was to have a website and make sure the website, as you know yourself, when I'm contacting you, you could see it in the base or the signature of my email. And if they're interested enough, they'll go look at the website and see how professional it is. So I'd recommend a good website too. Pitching these days to editors is a much more um, constrained by time. I would say you've got about 10 seconds to catch anybody's attention and then it's gone. So that would be my suggestion. That's what I've learned the hard way.
Mm, yeah, understandable. Maybe it's not a good idea to tell people that our CEO is a kid. Or maybe it is, who knows?
Yeah, I mean, an interconnected world these days. Everybody's connected.
Yes, but let's be honest, we all know cats rule the world. So
Yeah,
maybe I should keep it that way on
I
our,
think
on
so.
our
Yeah, yeah,
page.
yeah.
And you also mentioned reviews. That's always the question for authors, I suppose. Shall we
Mm,
read the reviews? Shall we not read the reviews? One star. I do that sometimes when I look up a
yeah,
book. I look at
yeah.
the one-star reviews, and like you said, most of the time they're not useful because they give 1 star and that's it. They don't even say why. They
Yeah,
only
yeah.
offer 1 star. And like you said, sometimes even the 2-star reviews are more useful, are more
I do find
insightful.
that, yeah. The 2-star reviews, they're the ones I pay attention to. You know that you're going to have people who like your books, but the 2 stars always tell me they really wanted to like the book, but they didn't like it that much, and they usually give you a reason why. Um, yeah, I'm a terrible man for checking reviews out. Um, I'm sensitive to criticism, but generally, as a rule, I don't pay that much attention to them.
Yeah. Question is, should we at all? I mean, yeah, we all do it. Let's be
Yeah,
honest.
yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, of
But
course, you're curious to know. I mean, it's
yeah,
kind of I wouldn't call it a fetish, but it's a borderline. You have to know what people say and what they think about it. But
yeah,
obviously,
exactly.
particularly the quite complicated algorithms with Amazon, the
Mm,
more reviews you get, good, bad, or indifferent, pushes you up the charts, as it were. So, I think the benchmark is 50 reviews, and once you get over 50, you then go up to another strata of promotion. So
mm,
I think I've only got one book that went over 50, but it's still out there. It's still getting
yeah,
pitched, I suppose, or shown to other people.
yeah. Another good thing is Goodreads, as far as I have
Yeah,
heard,
yeah.
where
I'm on
people.
Goodreads, and again, I think with Goodreads, they have quite genuine reviews. I think
Mm,
Goodreads is better than the marketplace reviews because
mm,
it is for readers and it is for writers, and
yeah,
generally they're fairly honest about what they put up.
yeah, yeah, I think so too. Yeah, maybe we should look there more often instead of Amazon.
Well, yeah, I'm usually on Goodreads every day because what I generally try to do is I try to follow the book challenge. So
Mm,
I've set myself 55 books this year, a bit of a tall order, but to read 55. But I also try to review them as well, good, bad. But overall, I'm going to get a book that interests me, so the writer gets off okay. Like
yeah,
when I get your book, I'll bang it up on Goodreads and I'll give it a review.
yes, be honest, be critical.
It should be
Yeah,
right.
absolutely. I absolutely appreciate it. Yeah, I know what you mean. I mean, I do not have set myself a goal as a reader insofar
Yeah,
like you do, that I say, okay, I'm going to read, 55 books this year or so on.
yeah,
When I look back, or when I looked back on 2024, it turns out we did have about 55
yeah, thereabouts. Yeah, yeah,
guests. Yeah. So that makes, okay, 55 or 54 books that I read for the podcast and everything in between what I read,
yeah,
just like you said, for pleasure or
yeah, yeah.
because it just turned
Research
up.
even.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And what's very dangerous for me is listening to history podcasts.
All
That's
right.
awfully
Okay.
dangerous for me.
Yeah, yeah. Just lost in them. Yeah, yeah.
This is incredible
No.
because
It's no, Goodreads is a good place to go to,
Yeah,
and I look back over it. There's some books that stay with me, and there's some books I completely forget. But I
yeah,
do have a Kindle, so I read that
yeah.
in work, and I read that when I've got free time. And
Mm,
then I've sort of rejoined the library because I was
mm,
buying books all over the place,
mm.
and they get to be quite an expensive habit. So I go to the library and I'll take out a book and I'll read it that way. And I still
Yeah.
buy Kindles. Yeah,
Yep, 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 me too, because where would you put all those books otherwise?
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, the bookshelves are full, as you can see behind me. So
Yes,
we're
yes.
doing okay.
Yeah, they are on the bookshelves, they are on every board, every free surface,
Yeah.
you know.
Our house is the same. This is a little office we have out the back, but the main house has got even more books in there. So
Mm,
it's,
I hear
but
you.
I think the older I get, the less interesting television is, and the more I'm inclined to read anyway.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah. Enjoy a good book on your
okay, I will.
couch. Yeah,
Cup of
absolutely.
coffee outdoors. Now the weather's turning good, and
Yes.
a good book.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also something you said as an advice for writers, because that's one advice every author will give you, I suppose. Read, read, read.
Read absolutely good books, bad books, and even genres that you wouldn't normally go to. There's a Ramstasy sort of popularity growing.
Mm,
The Court of Thorns and Roses. That's one of the books. I'm sort of dipped in and out of those kind of books because it is a genre that is alien to me, that
mm-hmm.
wouldn't interest me. But there are some good writers out there at the moment. Sarah J. Maas, she's a good writer.
Yep. The
She,
teacup
I mean,
has the book.
she takes the cliche and she manages to work around it in a very good way. So yeah, I'm all for reading that as well.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely understand that. Like you said, you're not so fond of fantasy, but I have to say occasionally I do enjoy a good fantasy
Yeah,
book,
pure
especially.
escapism.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, but also the whole world building and so on, what the
Yeah,
ideas people can come up with, and see if they can keep it consistent, and is
yeah,
interesting if they can capture my interest.
yeah. It's maybe I just don't have the time to do the world building. Maybe I've already got the world and I'm doing my building on it. But yeah, like Ian Banks' use of weapons is he's a very good writer, and he wrote some very interesting science fiction. Science fiction is an
Mm,
area that interests me, and I might go
yeah.
and try something like that. Horror
Mm.
science fiction, maybe the next one.
Ah. Yeah, it's fascinating. A fascinating combination. And do you think that there will be more of this blending of genres in the future?
Yeah, I think the crossovers are already happening. I think there really is no genre anymore. Everybody
Mm,
sort of is trying something a little bit different. And obviously, as you point out, the rise of AI and the rise of Google,
mm,
searching and researching now, you've your information at
mm,
your fingertips. You don't need to go to university. You don't need to get a degree. You can get a book out of the library and then Google, and you can start to build from there. But I can see more and more genres starting to blend. It's inevitable because, as I said,
yeah.
it's an interconnected world, and we're being exposed more and more to other people's cultures, and I think
Mm,
it's only a good thing.
mm, yeah, absolutely. And do you think that I've asked that question a lot because it's slightly supposed different between the English speaking world and, for example, the German
Yeah,
speaking world? That, for example, crime fiction is perceived differently in the last, let's say, decade, because it is no longer looked down upon, especially in the
no,
English
no.
speaking world.
Yeah, I think. But see, I think the quality translations has improved immensely as
Mm,
well. I think there's an awful lot of foreign language books that translate very well into English, and
mm,
presumably the way around. But one thing I did notice, I was in holidays in Norway last year, and there were no English books, not even in any of the bookshops. They were all Norwegian or
oh,
German, which is
uh-huh.
great. But I was actually stuck for a book. Went into a shop and said, "Do you have any English books?" No, they don't. Not in the foreign language section. Thought that was unusual.
It is indeed. Did they say why or?
No, they just said there wasn't much demand for it.
Fascinating, unusual, because I always thought that especially the northern countries
Yeah.
read a lot of English. Oh.
No, there's all the Norwegian translations.
Mm. Hmm. It's a bit like Germany and Austria,
Yeah,
translations,
Switzerland as well.
translations.
Switzerland, outside of the major cities, it's hard to get English
Yeah,
language books. But
yeah,
then, of
that's
course, you have
true.
Amazon, so you can just order it and get it delivered to you.
Yeah, yeah, true. Good point. I mean, why would you even bother with the bookshop and going there when you can order from? I mean, that sounds. I mean, I know that sounds awful, but it's the easiest way.
Yeah, it is. It's convenience. And Kindle has changed everything
Yeah,
as well.
yeah,
You download a book and you can read it. If you don't like it,
yes,
you can just get rid of it.
yeah, absolutely. And if you don't want to wait, because sometimes I'm rather impatient, I have to admit, and then
Yeah,
I
yeah,
buy the Kindle version, and because I have to
yeah,
read
yeah.
it.
Yeah, well, if I really like a Kindle, I sort of have a budget in mind. I really don't pay more than £3 or £4 sterling, about
Mm,
€4 on one. But if I really like the Kindle, I will go out and get the book, the hard
yeah,
copy later on when it
yeah,
comes out in the shops.
yeah. I'm the same.
Yeah, yeah, we're all guilty of it. Bibliophiles, that's what we all are.
Yeah, yeah, true. And when I, especially when I compare the price of the German books and the English books, I mean, don't get me wrong, but what you have to pay for a German book on Kindle or even seriously? I
Yeah,
mean,
it's basically, yeah, it's a PDF and you're paying the same price as a printed book. I know,
yeah,
yeah.
sometimes even more. That's
Yeah.
the thing that
No,
that,
I
that
won't
puts
pay
me
a
off.
price like that. No, I'd rather just buy the book.
Yes, exactly. I mean,
Yeah,
Buchpreisbindung, all nice and good, but seriously, I mean,
yeah.
yeah,
The
yeah.
marketplace, Edith.
Yeah, well, yeah, I don't read German that much these days. It, I don't. I simply don't,
Yeah.
because most of the books are from English writers or English speaking writers, or
Mm,
even if they are from other countries. Yeah, why should I wait for a German translation? If the English
yeah,
translation is first, it doesn't matter to me.
yeah, yeah,
So
exactly.
I read the English one, and for some authors there are no German translations at all.
Yeah, yeah,
So you have to stay with the English one.
it's true.
Anyway, uh, Robert, you touched a little bit upon what's coming next from you. Can you
Yeah.
a teeny tiny bit elaborate for our listeners what we can expect from you next?
It's going to be the third investigation for PJ Crow. He's still in the small little town on the east coast of Ireland, and he's investigated a drowning in his first book, a suspicious hanging in his second one, and third one, he's going to find a body on the rocks of a lighthouse. That's probably how it's going to kick off, and he's going to find himself very mired into certain aspects of the dark web. So that's the plan at the moment. He's slowly coming back from a nervous breakdown. He's slowly coming back into the real world, and he's trying to get back onto the police force to actually take on this particular case. So that's what I'm planning at the moment. I've had a lot of fun with Crow. He's opened doors up for me that I didn't expect. So I'm definitely going to keep going with him for a bit longer.
We're looking forward to it.
Well, you talk about location. I live in a
Hmm.
small little town on the east coast, and it is just so rich for material. Like we've got quite a large market garden area with a lot of greenhouses. And in the last book, Malign Intent, set up a really good scene where Crow is chasing a protagonist through an antagonist through all the greenhouses in the town. So I had a lot of fun going around looking in the greenhouses, and they're huge. I mean, they're 600 or 700 feet long, full of gas, full of plenty of opportunities for surprises to spring out. So I had a lot of fun with that. And yeah, I'm just so this one it's going to be set in the town, but a little bit further out and more at sea than the other two.
Mm. And you said there will be the dark web will play a role in that book. Did you have
Yeah,
to do a lot of research on the dark web? Because when you hear dark web,
I
you always
haven't
I think,
really got to that stage yet. Yeah, about halfway
mm,
through, and I haven't really given. I have the dark web hovering around, going, yeah, something to do with that. Maybe something like Bitcoin mining
mm,
or some sort of wider
mm,
kind of the ugly side of the web. Maybe I
yeah.
don't know, animal testing, something like that. I might do something
Mm.
with that.
Ooh.
Might
No,
drift into horror for all the wrong ways.
okay. You have to put in a trigger warning. No cat or dog was injured
Yeah,
during your
during the course
writing.
of this book. No, no, there will be no cats or dogs injured. I promise you. But
Who?
there'll be a suggestion. There will be a suggestion. I know. I'm the same. If the dog dies, I won't read it. And
Yes.
anything happens to the cat, I don't want to know. It's gonna
Yeah.
be the book gets closed.
You can do whatever you like with the humans, but don't you
Yeah, but I
dare.
remember actually when I was 10 and seeing the end of Jaws, I cried because the poor old shark got killed. I mean, they harpooned it, they stabbed it, they shot it, they jammed an oxygen tank into his mouth, and then they shot a bullet into it. I mean, he was just being a shark.
Yeah, doing what he does.
Just
Feeding. Come on.
so I'm not into animal cruelty.
No, no. I believe you. I believe you.
Yeah,
Okay. Any questions? Not so far. People don't have
oh, it's Saturday
questions.
night. Yeah,
We have answered all the questions, I suppose.
very good.
Maybe. Is there anything else you would like our listeners to know?
Well, you can. I've tabbed my website to the Facebook page, so
Mm-hmm.
you can Google my name, Robert Craven, author.
Mm-hmm.
It takes you to my website. It's
Mm-hmm.
the most up to date. I'll be clipping this video to it as well on the
Mm-hmm.
press elements to it, and it gives you
Okay.
an overall view of where I'm coming from and my journey as a writer.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the only other thing I can say to anybody who wants to write, look, I always say it every time, if I can do it, anybody can. It's down to wanting to do it, believing you can do it, and you'd be surprised how easy you can do it if you just stick at it. But I think discipline is very, very important.
I'm
That
impressed by
whole
yours.
carving a bit of time out for yourself. I get 2 hours in the morning, and that's what I use it for.
Yeah, I'm impressed. I have to tell you that when you said you get up at 5. I also get up at 5 in the morning. But at 6 I'm already behind my
Yeah,
steering wheel and I'm off to work because I start work earlier than I really have
yeah,
to. But I need this half hour or 3/4 of an hour to do all, copying because I'm a teacher and get
right.
my material printed out and so on. And so I'm a bit envious.
Yeah, well, it's down to just finding the time. You could do as much work in half an hour as you could in 2 hours. The other
Yeah,
thing I would say is turn off your phone, turn off your
yeah,
laptop,
yeah.
get a pen, get a pad. And as I say, I always travel with a little notebook. I always keep a little
Mm,
one in my pocket with a pen. You'd be surprised where inspiration comes from. And I think
mm,
being able to physically jot it down
yeah,
is a good and important habit
mm,
to get into. Like for
mm,
years, I used to just write everything on a computer, and I'm moving away from that. I'm actually going back to getting large pads and just writing everything out longhand. I'm
mm-hmm,
actually working it out longhand before I go to the computer. And I
mm,
do find that writing everything down stays with you, sticks with you much
yeah,
better than a computer page.
yeah,
I have changed my style a little bit that way and also seek out better writers. I'm blessed to have met David Morrell. He's a very generous individual, and I've met other writers like Trevor Wood, and I've met other
mm,
writers like Howard Jackson, who, in their own way, influence you. The more you
yeah,
interact with other writers, the more information and help you get.
yeah. I do know what you mean when you say writing longhand, not using the computer. Remember my times as a student because it's always easier or better to learn when
Yeah,
you do it by hand instead of
I think
computer
it
because
was,
from the hand to your brain.
yeah, Cicero said something similar. I'm going to paraphrase him, but what you put on the page with the pen stays in your head much
Yeah,
longer. So,
yeah,
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 so
absolutely.
I've read that. What I do find is with every book I set down to write, I'm sure you know yourself, it is a different project. It has
Yeah,
different approaches. The
yeah,
last book is gone, and
yeah.
the way I know the book is over is that I'm no longer thinking about it during
Mm,
the day or
mm-hmm,
dreaming about it at night or getting up and tweaking it. So it generally takes roughly 2 years for me to write a book, but it leaves my head and it's gone. And
mm,
that's when I know it's ready to go. And that's
yeah,
when I'm ready for the next one.
yeah.
But I do think each book is a project that has to be approached in a very disciplined manner, but it is always completely different to the last
Mm,
one.
mm, yeah, yeah, understandable. And do you also visualize things or scenes in your head?
I do actually. There's actually a very funny story. I had one fight in a book called A Finger of Night between Ava and a larger
Mm-hmm,
German officer,
mm-hmm,
and I wanted it to be a very good fight. And myself and my wife on the carpet were kind of doing different poses, and she managed to kick the legs out from under me. And I said, "Yep, that's what I'm going to use in the book." So yeah, you do visualize things.
yeah.
I'd sometimes write out little kind of storyboards. I do a
Oh,
little bit of drawing. So
okay.
sometimes if there's a plot I'm struggling with, I might do a storyboard to it. Or just get your spouse to hit you. It kind of works that way as well.
It's a good idea. Yeah, but I do know what you mean because if I can't see it in my head, like a
Yeah.
film,
How can a reader see it? Yeah.
yes, and how can I describe it if I can't see it
Yeah.
first here before I put it down?
But sometimes talking to somebody as well, sometimes I drive my poor wife mad by saying, wait, I've got this idea. How's this sound? And she'll go, no, just not going to work. So sometimes it's good to bounce ideas as well off people.
Yeah, it is. It always depends on the answer because the teacher always says, "Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'd rather have it. It's not going to work than yeah, whatever. Yeah, yeah.
It's okay." I mean, what does it even mean? It's okay. Yeah, but well, dear listeners, questions for Robert
I think we're pretty much
Craven.
close to it. They can put it down on the comments field. I'll be happy to
Yes,
comment and answer back if they want to put anything down.
yes, or let you know, or contact you on Facebook.
Or at my
If
website, there's a
yes,
contact form they can fire into there, and I can very happily respond to them if they have.
sorry.
Uh, I have a contact form on my website as well. They can
Okay,
also
yeah.
contact me.
If they want to know more. Okay, we have one thumbs up. Thank you very much, whoever
That's
sent
always
it.
good.
Yep, enjoying what we are talking about.
Yeah,
Robert, it was an absolute pleasure having you on again.
absolute pleasure to talk to you again, Edith.
It is wonderful. Please wait for me in the green room. Don't go away.
Right. Have a whiskey, have it ready for me, and I'll talk to you then.
Absolutely. See you shortly.
Cilantro.
Yep, see you shortly. Dear listeners, dear subscribers, we do hope you enjoyed this conversation, this talk as much as my guest and I did. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. And we do hope you will tune in again for another episode of Book Lovers Companion. Until next time.